Most people can become distracted about seeking if God exists rather than seeking him to actually build a relationship with him. And then you will be shown that he does exist. This does an extremely good job of explaining. Let's hear
Experience
this.
of God. Now, same way, belief in God is for those who know him a properly basic belief grounded in our experience of God. Now, if this is right, there's a danger that arguments for God's existence could actually distract your attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make his existence evident to you. We mustn't so concentrate on the external arguments that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. So, in conclusion, then, we've seen 5
key points for those who listen.
Good arguments to think that God exists. If Mr. Hitchens wants us to believe instead that God does not exist, then he must first tear down all 5 of the arguments that I presented, and then in their place erect a case of his own to prove that God does not exist. Unless and until he does that, I think that theism is the more plausible worldview.
Thank you. So now let's get to a bit of what he's going to respond, and then we're going to get back to him, okay? So...
Am I audible to all?
Yes, you are, sir.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades,
Hitchens.
friends, thanks for coming out, as Senator Larry Craig actually did say at his press conference. Thank you, Mr. Hewitt, and Dr. Craig, for being among them very many, taking me up on the challenge I issued when I started my little student, and the very interesting and noteworthy discrepancies between them. And one that I want to call attention to at the beginning of this evening is between those like my friend Doug Wilson, with whom I've now caprice of it, the tremendous tinkering and incompetence of it, never mind, at least we're here, and we can be people of faith. It doesn't work for me, I have to simply say that, and I think there may be questions of psychology involved in this as well. Believe it if you can. I can't stop you. Believe it if you like. You're welcome. It's obviously impossible, as I said before, to disprove, and it equally obviously helps you to believe it if, as we all are, you're in the happy position of knowing the outcome. In other words, we are here, but there's a fallacy lurking in there somewhere too. Is there not? Now, it's often said, it was said tonight, and Dr. Craig said it in print, that atheists think they can prove the non-existence of God. This, in fact, very slightly but crucially misrepresents what we've always said. There's nothing new about the new atheists, it's just we're recent. There's nothing particularly new. Dr. Victor Stenger, a great scientist, has written a book called The Failed Hypothesis, which he says he thinks that science can now license the claim that there definitely is no God. But he's unique in that, and I think very bold and courageous. Here's what we argue. We argue quite simply that there's no plausible or convincing reason, certainly no evidential one, to believe that there is such an entity, and that all observable phenomena, including the cosmological one to which I'm coming, are explicable without the hypothesis. You don't need the assumption. And this objection itself, our school falls into at least 2, perhaps 3 sections. There's no such thing, no such word, though there should be, as adeism, or as being an adeist, but if there was one, I would say that's what I was. I don't believe that we are here as the result of a design, or that by making the appropriate propitiations and adopting the appropriate postures and following the appropriate rituals, we can overcome death. I don't believe that, and for a priori reasons, don't. If there was such a force, which I cannot prove by definition that there was not, if there was an entity that was responsible for the beginning of the cosmos, and that also happened to be busily engineering the very laborious production of life on our little planet, it still wouldn't prove that this entity cared about us, answered prayers, cared what church we went to, or whether we went to one at all, cared who we had sex with, or in what position, or by what means, cared what we ate, or on what day, cared whether we lived or...
Wait, but yet, us as humans, when we have kids, we care about every single little detail that he just described. You care about which school your kids go to. You care about people. All right, humans, okay, maybe I'm stretching or reaching. How about pets and animals? You care about which vet they go to. You care about what they eat because they might get sick or they might not. So you can see who is in the hierarchy or in a position of ownership always cares about their creation. Now, in this certain manner, you didn't create the dog, but yes, you purchased it, you bought the dog, therefore the dog belongs to you. And because it belongs to you, you care about every single thing poor Mr. Doggy or Mr. Poodle is eating. Why? Because his well-being is essentially your well-being. If he's not good, or if he gets, God forbid, attacked, your pet, you're going to cry. Most people cry when they lose their pet. So you can see that already disputes everything.
Or died. There's no reason at all why this entity isn't completely indifferent to us. That you cannot get from deism to theism except by a series of extraordinarily generous to yourself assumptions. The deist has all his work still ahead of him to show that it leads to revelation, to redemption, to salvation, or to suspensions of the natural order, in which hitherto you've been putting all your faith, all your evidences on scientific and natural evidence, or why not, for a change of pace and a change of taste, say yes, but sometimes this same natural order, which is so miraculous in observation, no question about it, is so impressive in its favoring the conditions for life in some ways, but it's randomly suspended when miracles are required. So with caprice and contempt, these laws turn out not to be so important after all, as long as the truth of religion can be proved by their being rendered inoperative. This is having it both ways in the most promiscuous and exorbitant manner in my submission. Bear in mind also that these are not precisely the differences between Dr. Craig and myself, I mean, morally or intellectually equivalent claims. After all, Dr. Craig, to win this argument, has to believe and prove to a certainty. He's not just saying there might be a God, because he has to say there must be one, otherwise we couldn't be here and there couldn't be morality. It's not a contingency for him. I have to say that I appear as a skeptic who believes that doubt is the great engine, the great fuel of all inquiry, all discovery, and all innovation, and that I doubt these things. The disadvantage, it seems to me, in the argument goes to the person who says, no, I know it must be true, it is true. We're too early in the study of physics or biology, it seems to me, to be dealing in certainties of that kind, especially when the stakes are so high. It seems to me, to put it in a condensed form, extraordinary claims, such as the existence of a divine power with a son who cares enough to come and redeem us, extraordinary claims require truly extraordinary evidence. I don't think any of the evidence we heard.
I called it before he even finished it. So extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But when it comes to faith or religion, it actually doesn't. Otherwise, it's not faith. Okay? If I require you if I require every single thing from you before I could do a thing for you, and yet I call myself a loving father, I love you, that in itself defeats the fact that I can just do it for you because I love you. Hopefully I didn't lose you there, because even I was like, okay, that could lose certain people. This is when the comment warriors come out. Okay? But if I say I'm your father by blood, all right? You don't need to do anything to prove that I'm your father. Why? Because DNA shows that I'm your father. Why does the child need to do backflips and all sorts of things to impress me? And then when I ask them, what are you doing? I'm your father. He's like, no, I'm trying to prove that you're my father. It's like, no, you don't need to do anything extraordinary to prove that I'm your father. I'm your father by blood anyways. So with us Christians, we know it gets, this is where it gets a bit hard to explain to a non-believer, because if you don't experience God, Christians will understand, and this is why sometimes we can see that why there's difficulties in explaining, especially with someone who's an atheist. Christians will understand that when you encounter God, you just know he exists. You can't explain it, because somebody would then come and say, oh, well, give me proof. It's like, well, that defeats the whole purpose, because if you had all the proof then it defeats him being God. It defeats faith. It defeats the joy of making it to heaven, because you're rewarded heaven because you believed by faith. Go. Your faith has healed you. Those who believe in the Son will have everlasting life. So it defeats the whole point of believing. So that's what I'm saying, is like a child who's never done a DNA test on their father believes that that's their dad because they've seen enough evidence of them taking care of them, from when they were young and all of this. And then your rebuttal will be, well, how do I know? Because he could also not be my father, and the DNA test could show he's not my father. But that kind of defeats the facts. Why? Because that child could grow up not knowing that is their father or not, with no DNA test ever been done, and that child would die knowing that was their father. That's the power of belief. Like that's what I'm talking about. That's the power of faith. So that child would die like knowing that was my father, even though it wasn't. So I hope you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. So I'm saying this to say, okay, before I went on my my run there, I'm saying this to say that without faith, everything is deleted. It makes zero sense. And you as an atheist who's watching, you're always going to be spiraling, going up and down, loops, a bunch of loops, because you're looking for 100% evidence. If I can see, it's like seeing is not believing. Seeing is not believing.
We heard from Dr. Craig, brilliantly marshaled as it was in physics with the old dogmas. Well, one is the idea of this fine-tuning, about which I've only left myself 3.5 minutes. I'll have to refer some of this to later in the discussion. This is essentially another form of pattern seeking on the basis of extremely limited evidence. Most physicists are very uncertain, as they have every right to be. In fact, I would say, for physicists, as they have the duty to be at the moment, extremely uncertain about the spatio-temporal dimensions of the original episode, the Big Bang as it's sometimes called. We're in the very, very early stages of this inquiry. We hardly know what we don't know about the origins of the universe. We're viewing it from an unimaginable distance, not just an unimaginable distance in space. We're perched on a tiny rock in an extremely small suburb of a fairly minor galaxy, trying to look to discern our origins, but also at an unbelievable distance in time. And we claim the right to say, we can see the finger of God in this process. It's an extraordinarily arrogant assumption. It either deserves a Nobel Prize in physics, which it hasn't yet got, I notice. I don't know any physicist who believes these assumptions are necessary, or it deserves a charge of hubris. Let me make 3 tiny, quick objections to it as it stands, and I'm no more a physicist than most of you are. I'll make these lay objections. 1, was there pre-existing material for this extra spatio-temporal being to work with? Or did he just will it into existence, the ex nihilo? Who designed the designer? Don't you run the risk with the presumption of a God and a designer and an originator of asking, well, where does that come from? Where does that come from? And locking yourself into an infinite
loop.
Regress. Why are there so many shooting stars, collapsed suns, failed galaxies? We can see with the aid of a telescope. Sometimes we can see with the naked eye. The utter failure, the total destruction of gigantic, unimaginable sweeps of outer space. Is this fine-tuning, or is it extremely random, capricious, cruel, mysterious, and incompetent? And have you thought of the nothingness that's coming? We know we have something now, and we speculate about what it might have come from, and there's a real question about ex nihilo, but nihilo is coming to us. In the night sky, you can already see the Andromeda Galaxy. It's heading straight for ours on a collision course. Is that part of a design? Was it fine-tuned to do that? We know that from the red light shift of the Hubble telescope, or rather Edwin Hubble's original discovery, the universe is expanding away from itself at a tremendous rate. It was thought that rate would go down, for Newtonian reasons. No, it's recently been proved by Professor Lawrence Krauss, the rate of expansion is increasing. Everything is exploding away even faster. Nothingness is certainly coming. Who designed that? And that's all if before these things happen, we don't have the destruction of our own little solar system, in which already there's only one planet where anything like life can possibly be supported. All the other planets are too hot or too cold to support any life at all, and the sun is due to swell up, burn us to a crisp, boil our oceans and die, as we've seen all the other suns do in the night sky. This is not fine-tuning, ladies and gentlemen, and if it's the work of a designer, then there's an indictment to which that designer may have to be subjected. I'm out of time. I'm very grateful for your kindness and hospitality. Thank you.
Let's get to his response.
Doesn't really give an argument that atheists mentions in tonight's debate. First, that there's no good argument that atheism is true. Now, far from being a point of contention tonight, as far as I understood Mr. Hitchens' last speech, he would agree with that first statement, that there is no good argument that atheism is true. He says, I simply don't have any positive reason to believe in God, but he doesn't really give an argument against God's existence. Indeed, he seems to suggest that's impossible. But notice that doesn't prove atheism. That just leaves you with agnosticism, namely, you don't know if there's a God or not. So at best, you're left merely with agnosticism. We don't see any good reason to think that atheism is true. Now, he did make some remarks about the theory of evolution, which at least insinuated that this was somehow incompatible with theism. And I have 2 points to make about this. First, I think that the theory of biological evolution is simply irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism. Genesis 1 admits all manner of different interpretations, and one is by no means committed to six-day creationism. Howard Van Til, who is a professor at Calvin College, writes, is the concept of special creation required of all persons who trust in the Creator God of Scripture? Most Christians in my acquaintance who are engaged with either scientific or biblical scholarship have concluded that the special creationist picture of the world's formation is not a necessary component of Christian belief. Nor is this a retreat caused by modern science. St. Augustine in the AD 300s, in his commentary on Genesis, pointed out that the days don't need to be taken literally, nor need the creation be a few thousand years ago. Indeed, he suggested that God made the world with certain special potencies that would gradually unfold over time and develop. And this interpretation came 1,500 years before Darwin, so that it is not a forced retreat in the face of modern science. So any doubts that I would have about the theory of biological evolution would be not biblical, but rather scientific. Namely, what it imagines is fantastically improbable. Barrow and Tipler, 2 physicists, in their book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, list 10 steps in the course of human evolution, each of which is so improbable that before it would occur, the sun would have ceased to be a main sequence star and incinerated the Earth. And they calculate the probability of the evolution of the human genome to be somewhere between 4 to the negative 180th power to the 110,000th power, and 4 to the negative 360th power to the 110,000th power. So if evolution did occur on this planet, it was literally a miracle, and therefore evidence for the existence of God. So
that is hilarious.
I don't think this is an argument for atheism. Quite the contrary. It really provides good grounds for thinking that God superintended the process of biological development. So the Christian can be open to the evidence to follow it where it leads. By contrast, as Alvin Plantinga has said, for the naturalist, evolution is the only game in town. No matter how fantastic the odds, no matter how improbable, it's got to be true, because there is no intelligent creator and designer. So in one sense, you've got to feel a little sorry for the atheist. He can't really follow the evidence where it leads. His presuppositions determine the outcome. By contrast, if there is a fine-tuner and creator of the universe, then already in the initial conditions of the Big Bang, you have an elaborately designed universe that permits the evolution and existence of intelligent life. And I think evolution simply layers on more improbability. Now, Mr. Hitchens says, but why did God wait so long, all that waste during this time? Well, that sort of concern with efficiency is only of importance to someone with either limited time or limited resources, or both. But in the case of God, he has both unlimited resources and unlimited time, and therefore it's simply not important to do this in a quick way. Well, now, Mr. Hitchens says, but why did God wait so long before he sent Christ? Human beings have existed for thousands of years on this planet before Christ's coming. Well, what's really crucial here is not the time involved, rather it's the population of the world. The Population Reference Bureau estimates that the number of people who have ever lived on this planet is about 105 billion people. Only 2% of them were born prior to the advent of Christ. Eric Krapes of the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research says, God's timing couldn't have been more perfect. Christ showed up just before the exponential explosion in the world's population. The Bible says in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son. And when Christ came, the nation of Israel had been prepared. The Roman peace dominated the Mediterranean world. It was an age of literacy and learning. The stage was set for the advent of God's Son into the world. And I think in God's providential plan for human history, we see the wisdom of God in orchestrating the development of human life, and then in bringing Christ into the world in the fullness of time. So I don't see that there are any good grounds here for thinking that this provides reason for atheism. Now, what about my arguments for theism? Mr. Hitchens had some general remarks here. He says it's difficult to get from deism to theism. Now, I want to point out that's a false use of these terms. This is simply confused. Deism is a type of theism. Theism is the broad worldview that God exists. Deism is a specific kind of theism that says God has not revealed himself directly in the world. Now, my arguments are a cumulative case for Christian theism. They add up to the belief in the God that has been revealed by Jesus of Nazareth. Now, Mr. Hitchens says, but you must prove this with certainty. Not at all. I am not claiming these arguments demonstrate Christian theism with certainty. I'm saying that this is the best explanation of the data when you compare it with other competing hypotheses. I think it's more probable than not. He quotes me as to saying the Holy Spirit's witness is the basis for knowing Christianity to be true, and I affirm that. I think the fundamental way in which we know Christianity is true is through the objective inner witness of God's Holy Spirit, what I called the immediate knowledge of God himself in my fifth point. On the basis of that, we have a properly basic belief in the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. But when it comes to showing someone else that what we know through the witness of the Holy Spirit is true, here we appeal to argument and evidence as I've done tonight. And the arguments and evidence that I've appealed to are largely deductive arguments. This isn't retrospective evidentialism. These are deductive arguments. If the premises are true, then you cannot deny the conclusion on pain of irrationality because the conclusions follow with logical necessity from the premises. So the only way to deny the conclusion is you've got to show me which of the premises are false. That's why you've got that program insert with the premises in your program for these arguments. Mr. Hitchens needs to identify which premises of the argument he rejects as false if he's to reject the conclusions. Now, with respect to my cosmological argument, notice that he didn't dispute whatever begins to exist has a cause, nor did he dispute the philosophical and scientific arguments for the beginning of the universe. All he asked was the question, was there pre-existent material? The answer is no, there was not. As Barrow and Tipler point out, at this singularity, space and time came into existence. Literally nothing existed before the singularity. So if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo, that is, out of nothing. And this isn't talking religion, folks. This is talking contemporary cosmology. So the first argument, it seems to me, is unrefuted. What about the fine-tuning argument? Here he said, well, scientists are terribly uncertain about the fine-tuning argument. Well, I think that's simply not the case. Sir Martin Rees, the Royal Astronomer Royal of Great Britain, has said, "The laws governing our universe appear to be finely tuned for our existence. Everywhere you look, there are yet more examples. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning." Ernan McMullen, philosopher of science, says it seems safe to say that later theory, no matter how different it may be, will turn up approximately the same numbers. And the numerous constraints that have to be imposed on these numbers seem both too specific and too numerous to evaporate entirely. So that it's very unlikely that this fine-tuning is going to vanish or be explained away. Now, Mr. Hitchens responds, but we're headed toward nothingness. We're ultimately going to be doomed, and therefore the universe is not designed. Well, now, this is not a very powerful objection. The temporal duration of something is irrelevant to whether it's been designed. The products of human intelligence and engineering, like computers and automobiles, will eventually decay and cease to exist, but that doesn't mean they weren't designed. I think the real objection he's getting at here is, why would God create mankind only to have it go extinct? But of course, you see, on the Christian view, that's false. That is an atheistic assumption. On the Christian view, life does not end at the grave, and God has given assurance of this by raising Jesus from the dead. So the objection simply has no purchase against Christian theism. So it seems to me that the fine-tuning argument is also unrefuted. What about the moral argument? We saw that without God, there are no objective moral values. Mr. Hitchens agrees with this, and yet he himself affirms over and over again moral statements, like the moral reprobation of religious intolerance and violence in the name of religion. So he does affirm objective values, but without any basis for it. What I can offer him as a theist is a transcendent basis for the objective moral values and duties that we both want to affirm. Fourthly, the resurrection of Jesus. Again, there was no response to this. Let me simply quote N.T. Wright in his recent study of the resurrection. He says that the empty tomb and the appearances of Jesus have a historical probability so high as to be virtually certain, like the death of Augustus in AD 14 or the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. So we are on very solid ground in affirming these three facts that I mentioned in my opening speech, and I can't think of any better explanation than the ones that the eyewitness gave, namely that God raised Jesus from the dead. Finally, the immediate experience of God. Unless Mr. Hitchens can show that I'm psychologically deranged or delusional, it seems to me I'm perfectly rational on the basis of my immediate experience of God to believe that God exists, and that therefore this for me is a properly basic belief. So I think all of these arguments stand intact despite his refutation. We've seen no argument for atheism, so clearly the weight of the evidence falls on the side of the scale for Christian theism tonight.
Wow, he smoked that, absolutely destroyed it, to be honest with you. Absolutely destroyed it. Let me know your comments in the comment section down below. Let's read the comments. I'll keep it playing. Let's read some of the comments. You know what? He's going to start talking over it. So 170,000 comments, man. Goodness me. These guys clearly don't know how to argue their points. So they have... Goodness me. Man, the guy that I like destroyed the guy that I don't like. I'm assuming he's talking about, you know how. It's almost impossible to win an argument with a genius. It's even harder to win an argument with an idiot. You let me know who he's referring to. But you can see people want to turn to their own ways. They don't want anything to do with God, so it makes it very hard for them to take in anything towards or anything about God. So whenever you mention God to them, if someone already blocks out, they're not even willing to take thought. They're not even willing to consider what you're saying. Then it's a lose-lose situation. But yeah, I want to hear from you guys. I don't want this video to drag out too long. Let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. God bless you.